I think that's what's
Right.
happening in a lot of Asian societies. People are part of those social networks because they have been taught it's really important, but they
Yeah.
don't really show who they are, and nobody does. So
Nobody
everybody's
does.
kind of like
Nobody does.
stuck.
Guess why? Guess why? Because it's very important for Asians, like, to keep that face. So like that image that you project out to the world is more
Yeah,
important than the person you are. You don't want people to know the person you are
exactly.
because that's
Yeah.
dangerous. I mean, again,
Yes.
there's a huge component in the culture where it's working against vulnerability, right? So anything
Yeah.
vulnerable, anything too authentic is like frowned upon. Not only that, but it's dangerous and you need to keep it at bay. This is the Asian Rebel Club podcast, a space for the ones who grew up chasing approval and are now learning how to be free. I am Crystal Ren, entrepreneur, creative, and recovering achievement addict. Each week, we dive into honest conversations with Asian rebels, rewriting what success, identity, and freedom really mean. If you're ready to live your story, not somebody else, welcome home. Today, it will be the first episode of our podcast, and I have my friend Jay from Bali, who's not Asian, by the way, but an honorable Asian because he spent a lot of time in Asia and has an extensive interest in Asian culture to interview me because I am terrible at talking into a camera by myself. And I thought it will be much better if I have another person to ask me a bunch of random questions. So I have nowhere to hide other than give you the most raw truth about everything about me and also about why I wanted to start Asian Rebel Club and everything else. And since he's not Asian, I thought that his question will be even more innovative and raw. So welcome, Jay, and welcome to Asian Rebel Club. You are the first guest in the podcast. How does that feel?
Feels amazing. I'm honored. Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you. So let's begin. Shoot anything and everything you want to ask me and grill me.
Yes. So the first question I'd like to ask you is I'd like to understand the mission of the Asian Rebel Club. And so if you think of like 5 years in the future and you have succeeded beyond your wildest dreams, what would that reality look like? What have you accomplished in those 5 years with the Asian Rebel Club?
Well, so first of all, I wanted to say that the reason why I want to start Asian Rebel Club is really it's really about myself because I would think about myself as rebel. Actually, let me backtrack a little bit because when I was in management consulting and I was called a rebel by my coworker, and I remember to be very offended when he called me a rebel because it's not good in professional services to be called a rebel. That is the least professional you can be. And I still remember how I felt and I didn't want to own it. But fast forward now, I realized my entire journey from even when I was a little girl in China to now, I've always been rebellious, but not really rebellious from a very traditional standard. It's more of rebellious in a way where I'm always true to myself and I literally can't lie to myself of what I wanted to do in life and the person I want to be. And I burned a lot of bridges and made a lot of tough calls to not choose the most easy path in life, and which to a lot of people, it was just like, why would she want to make all these decisions and make her life much harder, right? And for me, I think the reason is that I can't lie to myself, first and foremost, of the person who I want to be. And I think that in Asian standards, sometimes that is rebellious because in this culture, we were taught to be X, Y, and Z, a lot more so than, say, Western culture. And I think that as a result of it, to be yourself requires a lot more courage than perhaps a culture where you were learning at a young age that this is allowed. So I wanted to start this club first and foremost is for myself because I do think now I accepted that I am a rebel in this cultural setting. And I think that there's a lot of people out there who wanted to be a part of this, who identify as a part of this, or maybe they think that there's something off, something they want to change in their life, and they're searching for that courage and searching for that examples from other people, but they're too scared, or maybe they just don't know how to do this and, how to be happier, how to be more honest, how to be more authentic, and they're looking for a community, they're looking for that authenticity and validation from like-minded people. And I wanted to be that voice, or I want to build the space for voices like that. and also wanted to showcase people through podcast episodes and me interviewing other people. And we discuss about a variety of topics and also from the community itself, so that people started to be like, wow, this is possible and this is encouraged and I want to be part of that. And to your question, what would it look like in 5 years? I don't really know what exactly what that will grow into, but I would hope that it will become, I want it to be almost like a new neural pathway in people's mind, right? Where they realize this is possible. They realize that it's not impossible. It's a basic human right, right? I want people to be like, okay, like today I might be stuck in a dead end job and I want to be a musician or I want to be a dancer, whatever that is. I can do it tomorrow. Or I don't want to have a conventional marriage. I wanted to choose differently. I don't care about upsetting my parents. Like, these things should be allowed, and these things should not be taking years and decades for people to decide upon. So that is something I want this community and this concept to grow into.
Beautiful. So, if I understand you correctly, what you're trying to do is provide an example for people who need courage in order to step in a better version of themselves.
Yeah.
And who haven't maybe found support in that before. And I think
Yeah.
that's a beautiful mission. How have you been able to do that for yourself first? Because you didn't
So
have the Asian Rebel Club, right?
no, well, I didn't have it. And maybe a little background of myself. I was born and raised in China. I spent 20 years in China, and I received quite traditional Chinese education in a sense where it's all about your performance in exams. And actually, there's a caveat in it where I actually received half of my education was in more liberal education form. We were encouraged to be who we were, but then I got into another school, which is a lot more traditional Chinese in a way where, say, I was actually studying 16 hours a day for 3 years. And every single exam, the marks of the exam, doesn't matter whether it's a formal exam or a mock exam, it was published publicly. So everybody can see your scores, everybody can see your ranking, how you were compared to other people in the same class, how you were compared to yourself from the last exam. So everything was so public in a sense where you're pretty much just that person, right? Like that person, that student was your identity, and your mission is to be number one. Doesn't matter whether you like the subject, doesn't matter, that will be your career choice later on. You don't get to choose and think for yourself. Coming from that background, where actually I got into a very good university in China. It was one of the Ivy League schools. In fact, as we mentioned about it before, the DeepSeek founders came from my major in my university, right? So I studied computer science there as well. And I got a national scholarship. Basically, I was able to get amazing jobs with that university, with that major, because in China, your university and your major is everything. So if you're already in the Ivy League system there, then you're set for life. But then for me, I decided that this is not what I wanted. Even though, everything was working out great for me, I was like, okay, like, I didn't want this because I didn't like computer science. I think I like something more social science related, right? Psychology, business, design, anything to do with people. I didn't know what that was. And also, I was in a long-term relationship with a boyfriend of mine. And I was able to just give everything up. I was like, okay, like, I think I wanted to go abroad. I think I wanted to go to the US and Canada. And let me just take a leap of faith. And then I went eventually to Canada by myself. And I broke up with my boyfriend, who I was dating for like 3-4 years. And then after that, I studied again in Canada, and then I worked there. And then I was like, okay, I'm not sure if I want this place. It's a little bit too slow for me, right? So let me just go somewhere where it could represent a fusion of my identity, which is Chinese and also Western at that point. So I thought, okay, what is that place? And I thought it's Singapore, because Singapore, you have both the Western influence and also the Chinese influence. And it's almost felt like a happy medium. I hadn't been to Singapore. It's the same thing. Hadn't been to Singapore at the time, and I was like, okay, let me just jump. And again, came to Singapore to get an MBA degree in INSEAD, and I didn't know anyone again. So that's just a bit of my background. In a nutshell, I've traveled to 50 countries. I've lived in like 5-6 countries. I changed my career multiple times. Started my career in investment banking and then got to management consult consulting. And then I became an e-commerce entrepreneur, built my brand in home decor from ground up, multi-seven-figure exit after a year and a half of that brand. And then I started another brand. I worked myself to a point where I was like, all of these things I was doing was actually chasing after success and validation in other people's eyes. So who the fuck am I? And I spent a few years thinking about that question. And then here we are. It doesn't even make any sense to me how come I was doing these things. Like every single step, I was like going from something that is so stable and so guaranteed. Every single step, I try to undo it. And I just don't understand why. And to this day, I still don't understand why, but I'm just kind of following my own desire. And to me, that is rebellious. And there's so many nights where I lay in bed, I'm just like, oh my God, like what the fuck am I doing? Like I felt like I'm just destroying my life, like, with every single decision I make, but I just can't undo it. Like I just needed to go forward with it. I don't know why. So here we are.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I love that, especially the phrase that you mentioned, following your own desire. I think that is such a beautiful and core message. And I think even in Western cultures in which I grew up, following your desire, as in like that as a tagline, is quite controversial for sure.
Really?
Yes, yes. So I'm really curious as to how you think you will be able to help other people also discover their desires in the first place, and then also maybe get the courage to follow their desires. Like, what's the model there?
I've done a number of interviews for the podcast because this is one of the themes I want to highlight, right? And then so in the process of interviewing other people, as you know, because you also have your own podcast, that you learn so much from even just talking to these people yourself. And I think one thing I noticed is that it doesn't matter what kind of success these people have, right? Because everybody got their own different success. Some of them, maybe monetarily, they're very successful. Some of them, maybe they are very artistically successful, right? And some of them are, maybe they're happy every day, they're living in peace. So that is very different. However, their inner world, that journey of going from a place where they're seeking happiness from outside to a place where they can generate more sustainable happiness, that is very similar, in my opinion. And I think that to answer your question, how can other people follow their own desire? I do believe there's kind of not a formula, but a right way to do. And also there's a wrong way, right? So let's start with the wrong way. The wrong way is that a lot of people think that in order to be happy. So this is what a lot of people think, right? They think that they should do XYZ before they can follow their desires. This is what I've noticed over and over again for most people I've seen. And that XYZ includes, I gotta make a certain amount of money, I gotta get married, I gotta have kids, like all the usual checklist items you needed to tick off, right? And when can I follow my desire? Perhaps when I retire, So this is kind of the textbook correct answer. But the problem I've seen is that to follow your desire is not something you can just turn on or off, right? It's not just something where you're like, okay, today I'm going to do it. Maybe I'm retired and I can do it. Like, it doesn't work like that. It's a mental muscle you needed to exercise. And the earlier you do, the more refined the process will become. And it's a lot more intuitive for you to do it every single time. Because also in life, right? Every single stage of your life, you will have different desires. So if you don't even allow yourself to do that in a young age, how can you even start doing it when you're like 60, 70? It will be much harder for you to do if you don't trust your ability to do it. You have never done it before and you haven't seen other people doing it. So I think that it's just like one of those things where it actually requires a lot of thought even before you achieve your checklist, right? And then, so that's number one. That's like the wrong way to do things. And then, so let's go to the right way to do it. I think for the right way to do it is to understand, first of all, why do you even need that checklist? to follow your desire. So like what is the reason behind that checklist, right? And the recurring things I've heard is like stability, so like I cannot do XYZ because I don't have financial stability. And then also fear of failure. So I can't do this because what if I fail, right? And that fear of failure is also it's twofold, right? So if I don't do this, which means I don't fail, right? Then my perception of myself would stay intact and other people's perception of me will stay intact. But if I do this, which means there is a chance of me failing, then there is a chance of other people changing their perception of me. And therefore, my perception of me will also be changed, right? So there's so many layers to it. But like once you start to realize all these things are illusion, first of all, other people don't care about you. Secondly, if you have a strong sense of self, you don't care about them, how they think about you, then all these things go away. And then you realize you can actually do whatever you desire from day one. You don't need to wait. And in fact, the longer you wait, the less chance you're going to work on that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And it's also somewhat similar to how things evolved in my own life, because, I also had a process. But I think what you're highlighting here specifically for the Asian Rebel Club is that I do believe that in Asian cultures in general, there is a lot more kind of like what I would say social anxiety, like the social pressure is much higher than in Western cultures. I think in Western cultures, there's a lot of these stories and myths that we have about self-realization, right? People who are very different and then they're celebrated for that. And I think that's much harder in Asian countries. So I'm curious if your perspective of that for yourself also changed due to your exposure to more Western cultures like living in Canada.
Yeah, so good question. I think I grew up a little bit differently, right? Because my parents weren't like necessarily typical Asian parents in the sense where they always encouraged me to speak and express my opinions. In fact, my dad named my Chinese name after he gave me a character which means talkative. So here I am talking, so which means I'm fulfilling my dad's wish, which means I'm a good Asian. But anyway,
You're fulfilling your destiny, basically.
Oh my gosh, right? And then he knew that. I don't know how the hell did he know it. But anyway, that was never a problem. So they wanted me to speak my mind. They wanted me to tell them what I think. And sometimes, like, even if certain things I said was controversial, they will not stop me. They're like, it's more important that you have your own voice and don't be afraid, right? And then so for that, I was in debating growing up. I was writing. So since I was 6 years old, I started to write and I started to publish newspapers and magazines. I co-authored a book when I was 15 years old. And then I wrote another one when I was in my 20s. So to me, that was my truth, right? And I needed to express myself. Doesn't matter how controversial these opinions, they deserve a place to exist. So that part was always there. And I think that the reason why I think I intuitively knew I want to get out of China because there's still a lot of things perhaps you can't say in China due to cultural reasons. And I felt it as a kid. And I felt like that was suppression. The Western culture is a lot more free in that sense. That's why I got out. And I think that in the Western culture environment, I got even more opinions because I've seen now different cultures, different viewpoints, and I started to have my own viewpoints while, thinking about why do I agree with this? Why don't I agree with that? And are people living in autopilot? So there's so many things which you will start to question when you have that collision of different cultures and also identities, right? Because I am Chinese in China and I'm majority. So people don't look at me and be like, well, she doesn't look like one of us. I'm pretty much one of them, right? When I'm there. But then when I'm in Canada, I'm different. And especially I was in Alberta with Asians, the minority, very much minority. So I need to carry myself differently there. And in Singapore, I also need to carry myself differently because I'm not Singaporean. So it's like a chance of you identifying yourself to people, right? Because they don't know who the hell you are until you tell them who you are. There's so many opportunities to do that in this kind of journey.
Beautiful. Crystal, I'm also curious as to basically the target audience of the Asian Rebel Club. Who are you speaking to ideally? Are these people who, like you, have Asian cultural backgrounds but have traveled and have different
Yeah,
perspective? Or do you also want to reach just, Asian people who stayed where they were and then
yeah.
maybe now are ready to discover something else?
So I think it's really just whoever resonates with the message. And I think that I've seen naturally, I think it resonates a lot with Asian American. And I think the reason is because having Asian parents, they were born into almost a system, right? A system at home, which they were taught a lot of Asian values. And some of the kids, their parents don't, perhaps don't even speak English or like they're not integrated. And so that's how they grew up. But when they are in the society, it's like completely different. And they also have seen different systems at work in the same time. So they are confused, right? In a sense where like one system asks them to be XYZ, a model student, a model citizen, like a model Asian, whatever. And then another system is telling them to be whoever they want, And so it's like that friction exists in their life day in and day out, but it's a very intangible. It's like the elephant in the room. If you don't have a channel for that energy, right? And it's just kind of stuck in your system. And I believe that like, once it's stuck, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until you started to deal with it. So I think that for them, it's quite an obvious issue. However, I have seen, for example, even in Singapore and even in China, people are looking for something beyond materialistic pursuits. And that's because these pursuits won't make you happy, right, in the long term, and they're not sustainable. They require you to constantly feed that desire to accumulate more and more stuff. So it's not a solution, right? And it's just isn't from a human development perspective, it holds you back. And I think that people start to wake up to that. Here in Singapore, I've seen that. And in China, I think it's also very obvious because people, they worked super hard up until this point. After COVID, the economy started to go down a little bit. So the reward of the hard work, isn't really here anymore as much as they were before. So now people start to be like, okay, then if the work I'm putting isn't generating as much result, then why the heck am I working so hard for? And then on top of that, the housing price is coming down, right? And then so people used to, it's like a formula, right? They're like, making money, they work hard, make money, put the money into the house, and then everything is going bigger and bigger. Like the work's getting better, money's getting more, house investment value is increasing, everything is good. But now like that thing is broke, right? So like the housing price is coming down and, perhaps the opportunity is not as much as they had before. So now they're questioning what is the new formula? So I think that everybody is kind of facing similar question. They're approaching a different way. And there's different moments for them to have that wake up call, but ultimately it's all pointing into the same direction.
Wonderful. Yeah, so we've talked about the origins, your background, why you're doing this, about the content and the kind of people you want to speak to. I'm also curious as to the form of the Asian Rebel Club. What will it be? Because now it's a podcast. What else will it be? Will you host some kind of like seminars? Will there be maybe books published? What kind of shape does this Asian Rebel Club take in your mind?
Well, yeah, so I think I can only talk about it one step at a time. And for now, the focus is really trying to push out as much voice as possible and also as much diverse voice as possible. So people are talking about finding yourself or, these kind of topics. There's different ways to do it, but a lot of them are career related, right? And I don't want it to be just a career related thing because I think that, first of all, there's already enough voices out there, but also life itself. You can't really just be like, this is my career, this is my personal life. I think that your way of thinking governs each area of your life. So in order to improve your life in general, you're going to start to think differently, right? So to your question, I think it's going to be a podcast where I will interview people in, business, in arts, in all sorts of walks of life, but also there will be community voices, which means that I would have people talk about their stories. These are not necessarily people that I, approach and be like, hey, you're a thought leader in this field. These are people like all of us that they just have stories, the viewpoints they want to share. It's just like how my parents encouraged me to do, right? Like, you have a viewpoint you want to share with the world. I think all these viewpoints will shape each one of our lives. And I think that they deserve to be heard because you never know who else is out there might benefit from it, right? So There will be community voices. There will be podcasts. There will also be newsletters. Obviously, it's on social media, it's Instagram, YouTube, all your jazz. So in terms of long term, whether there will be book published, I just mentioned, I am an author myself. So maybe, right? Maybe it's in the pipeline. We'll see how this thing, shapes out to be.
Yeah, I'm also really curious because you mentioned the word community a couple of times, and I think community is such a beautiful thing to build. I'm wondering in which way you're also going to encourage the community members to like converse with each other. I think one of the most beautiful aspects of a community is not just a group of
Yeah.
people who listen to the same podcast, but it's people who gather to talk about their own stories, right? Not just in the mic, but just with each other. So I'm
Yeah.
curious if you're planning some kind of community hub online
Yeah,
or
yeah,
offline.
yeah. Definitely, it's definitely planning to have maybe a Discord channel in the future or subreddit, also offline, workshops, gatherings, something that I genuinely like on myself, which, I wanted to, and this is really kind of my vision, right? Like, this is probably a little bit too early to say that because it's my brainchild right now and obviously not in the real world, but I wanted to gather people together where not only will they talk about a bunch of things, but also maybe they can do exotic dance together. They can discover themselves through movements, through arts, through music, through mindfulness activities. I think that's very much a area that I personally am very interested in, but also I think can bring rapid transformation to people and not just like the traditional talking and listening, right? And it could be a complementary activity to that. So that's all something that I'm thinking about. We'll see how, things work out in the future, but this could be down the line.
That's amazing. I love that idea. I think there's so much value in transcending the verbal communication and going to the body, going to the somatic system. And especially also in my limited exposure to Asian cultures, I have definitely noticed that in Asian cultures, this somatic part is kind of maybe even more repressed than in the West. So I
I
definitely agree
agree.
with you. Yeah,
I
that
agree.
this is such a high value kind of practice to step into for people who
Yeah.
want to discover who they are from the inside.
Yeah. Yeah, and from my own experience, I think so. I was very shy. So just a little bit of background. Actually, Jay and I, we met in a DJ class in Bali where we danced every day for hours. And I remember the first day I went to the DJ class, and the first thing I said to everyone was that I'm very shy. I'm very bad at dancing. I'm very self-conscious. I'm not sure how this is gonna work for me, but I'm here. And the reason is because I think we were just, I don't know whether, this is just me or something, but I was very self-conscious, right? And growing up, and I think there's probably something to it in Asian culture where we as a collection, we're always thinking about what other people are thinking about us.
Yeah.
So you can't really be yourself when you are being vulnerable, right? And dancing, singing, performing, put yourself out there. It's extremely vulnerable. Like I don't know who's going to listen to this and be like, "Oh, she's a fucking idiot. She doesn't know." The world is full of judgment, right? So I think that because of that, we perceive it to be safer to store all these things in our body than to release it because to release it is just too vulnerable. So I agree with it. But I think the benefit, as you mentioned, right, it's such a high leveraged activity to achieve. If your goal is to achieve freedom, authenticity, that is such a high valued activity to go through because you have so much stuff stuck inside of your somatic system. If you actually just do it, it brings it up, all together, right? So yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, the terms that I like to use for these things are like self-mastery and self-leadership, especially.
Yeah.
And I think the path to self-leadership through the body and the somatic experience of yourself as a being in the world is such a beautiful, fruitful thing to explore.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And I'm kind of excited to kind of even be part of that, like just going into my story, because as you said, we met on a DJ course. That's not an
Yeah.
accident. I think we're both also really interested in that aspect, right? And I've definitely noticed that in the parts of Japan that I like a lot, I spent a lot of time in Japan, there is almost no embodiment culture like that. And I was also thinking like, wow, I want to bring this here. I want to kind of contribute to these people opening up more to getting to know themselves in a different modality, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to ask you the question and hear your take on it. There's gonna be a way for them to release these energy, right, that got stuck in their body. If it's not through movement, there's gonna be some other way. So, what are the ways you have noticed in the Japanese culture that they're using it as a release?
Well, I can't say that I'm familiar enough with Japanese culture to really have an answer to that. I think from what I've seen, the Japanese release, as you call it, is mostly, it's a bit related to what I see here in Bali, actually. It's communal rituals, it's ceremonies, it's festivals. I feel like in Japan, festivals are really important and the whole community contributes to festivals. And then they dance and they sing together and they enact some kind of thing with what are they called, like monsters or something, like the gods or something like that, right? So I feel like the release is again more organized on a social level. It's not an
Right.
individual practice.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
it's a community practice
It's a
basically, just
community
like in
practice.
Bali.
Yeah, and it's also like this is what I've noticed in China, like in Korea, Japan, drinking culture, and also in China, they have this thing called like in Chinese called guangchang, which is like the square dancing. So a lot of, especially older women, they will gather together and they will dance in the park together, right? And it's not just like it's not sophisticated dancing. It's just like very simple movements. But then for them, it's really a it's not just dancing, it's a community, right? And some
Exactly.
people, they will walk by the park and be like, what are they doing? And they just look like they are enjoying themselves, but the dance is horrible and they don't care. And and I think that if they were just doing it by themselves, maybe they will get very self-conscious. But then because they're in a group, they're like, okay, the group is my shield, I'm saving this group, we're all in this together, right? So like that
Yes.
is definitely very healing.
Yeah. And so I imagine that this kind of group practice could be at the core of the Asian Rebel Club.
Yeah.
You're a group, you're a collective, bringing the kind of practices that you love and that you have found helpful to other people in Asia who then can
Yeah.
use that to gain the courage to be more themselves. I
Yeah.
think that's such a beautiful and necessary movement.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, in Chinese, we have a saying that the translation is essentially if you are the person who's leading the wave, like if you're a bird that's leading the wave, right, you're going to be shot. So, if you are unique and you are out there, you better not be, right? Because you're going to be the target.
Yeah.
So, as a result of that, people tend to follow instead of lead because following certain things make them feel safer. So that actually manifests itself into a lot of cultural phenomena, right? So when you are in Singapore, and it's just in a lot of parts of Asia, there will be a new store and there's a long line in front of the store, and you're like, what is going on here? What is this store? And you ask the people in the line, be like, what are you lining up for? And some of them be like, I have no idea, because everybody's lining up here. I think something interesting is happening. I don't know, this thing's popular, right? This thing's popular, therefore I'm here.
Amazing. Yeah.
So like it's interesting. It's really just very cultural. And but as soon as you start to realize that, like, hey, other people are in it as well, I am safe, like they want to join, they want to experience it. So it's just that the initial click is much harder.
Yeah. Crystal, I want to bring it back to something that's a bit more personal. I'm really curious if there are any parts that you are still trying to liberate in yourself. Because you've done a lot of work, obviously, of, coming from this Asian background and being a rebel and changing yourself and actually following your desire. Are there parts of following your desire that you've not fully realized yet?
Well, I think there's a lot. As you might know that once you're on this journey, you realize there's no destination because it's a lifelong thing, right? And I was just telling my friend the other day because he was like, "Oh, like I haven't figured out the parenting part." I'm like, just chill. There's going to be so many parts that you will need to figure out your entire life. And even if you look at those gurus out there, they seem like they have their shit figured out. I'm pretty sure they don't, right? Because life is fair to everyone where you will need to go through things and you need to figure things out once you go through them. And then for me, I think, even just to build this platform is a huge challenge for me, right? Because even though I've started to publish from a very young age, as a kid, I was very sensitive to criticism. I was very sensitive to people's perception of me. I was one of those kids. I wanted to put myself out there, right? And I did. But it's always very scary for me to do it. And every time And I remember people criticizing my writing, and sometimes they go a little bit personal. For example, if I were to describe my journey in a foreign country or something, and I wrote that in China, people be like, "Oh, she's so spoiled. She has the money to travel around, blah blah blah." Like they go really, really personal to attack you, and it used to give me nightmares, right? And I won't even open the comment section. Like I can't even do that because I'm like, oh my gosh, what are people gonna say about me? So to do this is very vulnerable in a sense where I literally put myself out there. Even though it's Asian Rebel Club, I built it, and people will say all sorts of things. I already know it. And I needed to overcome that, right? And to me now I'm ready. It's not like I don't care, but I think that the mission is bigger than myself. So, and I also think that it's a growth journey. I see it as a growth journey. And I think that once you have that mission and that's something that you're working towards and a purpose, it's so much easier for you to overcome hardship and to push yourself to grow. And that's just one example, right? And that's something that I think was severely lacking before when I was chasing more monetary, like materialistic things, which, you know, the purpose is missing. So when you are facing challenges, it's much easier to give up than, you know, an intangible purpose, right? Which is not really money or anything else, but it's something that's true to you, true to who you are.
Beautiful. For the people who are listening to this, assuming they resonate with what you're saying, what steps can they take to be part of this? Like, how can they contribute or become subscriber or anything like that? Is there anything set up that people can follow or connect with you in some way?
Yeah, they can join the waiting list. We still have it for the launch of the official launch of the podcast. By the time you're listening to it, you're probably one of them anyway, just because this will be published. But yeah, I'll link everything in the bio. Also, you know, we have our Instagram account, Asian Rebel Club. Also the YouTube channel, the TikTok account, and also this podcast and the newsletter. So everything's in place. Hopefully by the time that you're listening to this, and so you can just click subscribe. You will get all the content once they are published.
Beautiful. I have one more question for you, which is actually a question that I traditionally use on my podcast as well at the end of a conversation. And the question is very simple. Is there any other question that I haven't asked you that you'd have liked to answer?
Okay, yeah, sure. The first question that comes to my mind is a question whether there's a pivotal moment in my life that made me question norms and embrace the rebel mindset.
Cool. And what's your answer to that question?
Yeah, so I think there were many moments, but the most recent moment, which pretty much started to make me start to think about, you know, Asian Rebel Club as a concept, was that, again, a little bit background about myself. Born and raised in China, was really an alpha student and also employee that did everything on the checklist, right? So I went to management consulting. I got my Canadian permanent resident. I got into a top MBA school. I got married. I got into a prestigious management consulting firm. I then started my business, did quite well as well, you know, and I was featured on a lot of media outlets, and all these things come to a crash when I was starting my beauty brand after I exited my home decor brand. It was growing really well, right? And I had this moment. I called my dad. I was so burned out. I was so stressed out. I told my dad, I said, Dad, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And he's like, why? And I was like, well, because it's growing really fast. And I don't know if I can do what I did again. And it's stressing me out because I know exactly what's going to happen. I'm going to have so many sleepless nights. I'm going to negotiate every day with my suppliers. I'll need to monitor. And in fact, if I were still doing that, today, I'll be worrying about trade wars, right? I'll be worrying about tariff and, you know, all these things every day. And that time I was like, fuck, like, I just don't know if I can. I got so depressed, and I started to question, why the heck am I doing it? And I realized the reason in the end was because I always thought that in order to be loved, I needed to always be successful in the traditional sense, the societal sense, which means being the best at everything I do, make money, be pretty, because that's what you need to do, you know, as a girl, be fit, everything I do, I gotta be in the top because that's how they ranked us, right? Remember in China, that's how they ranked us. And if I don't do that, by the way, I won't be loved. And also, I need to be loved for people who don't love me. So if there's a person who doesn't like me, I need to prove them wrong because otherwise, like, then there will be proof out there that I'm not lovable, and that will suck, right? And then that will be like the end of my identity. That's what I constantly need to prove to myself. I needed to do, a checklist of things, right? I can't do anything beyond that. And that's when I realized, fuck, that's my illusion. And I got to the point where I realized that doesn't matter how hard I try to be successful, there will be people out there who don't love me because they just don't fucking love me. I rub them the wrong way. They don't like my personality. They think I'm too much, whatever that is. They will exist, right? And there's nothing I can do about it. The only thing I can do is that if I wanted for them to love me, I gotta be a different person. And if I'm able to do that, then I can. But you know what? I can't sacrifice myself anymore because I also have done that. And that also sucked, right? Because in the end, this is not you. And so when I saw my illusion and when I saw this is something that I don't want to compromise anymore, including my own mental health, I'm like, this need to change. And I got into like a 2-year hiatus where I just questioned everything in life. I wasn't sure, which part of my identity is me, which is something that's taught by the society. Wasn't sure, everything, right? I wasn't sure if I was in the right career path, in the right relationship, in the right country. Like, it was just like hell, like crashing down where I'm like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? Because nothing in my life is stable. And then I realized that even stability is an illusion because nothing is stable and nothing is certain. And that is the truth you gotta embrace, right? Because if you don't embrace that, if you want to control everything, that's when your misery starts. And that's when all these questions will have no answers. So that's why I started that's a moment, I think, is, kick off everything. And now the moment I realized that, what? The thing I wanted to do most is really just to have conversation with people. One of the things, right? Have conversation with people and exchange insights and give people the aha moments and also to have the aha moments myself, right? And if I were to do that every day for the rest of my life, that would be a really good life. And has nothing to do with money. It has nothing to do with status. It has nothing to do with like anything I was taught, but it felt right. And I'm like, guess what? I'm just gonna do it. And that's actually after the Bali DJ class, because there I was feeling so fucking good. And I didn't know that dancing can make you feel so good because I fucking hated dancing. I was so self-conscious. I would wear heels to parties so that when people are dancing, they're like, Crystal, why are you not dancing? I'm like, yeah, I'm wearing heels, like I can't dance. But like in Bali, and you know this, we were sweating every day, and that place is a shithole. Okay, that place had no AC. Was 6-7 people sharing a bathroom, a shower. We didn't even have a shower gel. We were using like hand soap for shower gel.
I
And
brought my own shower gel. I have experience with these things.
You are smart. And then people brought their own coffee because there's no coffee either. I mean, it's just like every day, and then there's quota, the food quota, right? And if you can only eat like 3 pancakes. If you run out of pancakes, you cannot get more. I was like, what the fuck? And then I felt so happy. I felt so alive. And it's like every single song we were dancing to, I just felt like I was so connected to myself and the spirit and people around me, and that gave me a way to express myself and also just feel like back home to myself every single day after that.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized, guess what? It's not too bad to just do things you wanted to do. All the worries about like, oh, how can I make money? Or like, how can I make living out of it? Or like, is that legit? What people think about me? Like all these things go out of window if you genuinely like what you do, if you genuinely feel alive in that every single moment. And that is true, right? Because that's kind of the only thing that's sustainable. You don't know if tomorrow's gonna come. You can't have a 10-year plan because you don't know if you're gonna have another 10 years. And nothing is guaranteed other than the moments you live in. So why don't you maximize that?
Yeah, I can hear how passionate you are about this. It's beautiful. And I would say almost I came to the same conclusion. For me, there's one aspect that I highlight, which is also the title of my podcast, incidentally. It's relating to self. I think the relationship you have with yourself is the only relationship that you will always be in. And in that sense, it's kind of like a constant throughout your life. And improving that relationship, constantly kind of nurturing that relationship is one of the most meaningful things you can do to continuously improve your life. And then you get to the point where, like you say, you're doing things that make you feel alive. Because that's when you have a good relationship with yourself, that's what you allow yourself to do. You no longer put yourself in a box or anything like that. You're just like, wait, no, I'm kind to myself. And being kind to myself means that I do things that I enjoy doing.
Right,
And then
right.
from there, everything changes. So,
Right, and
yeah.
I think that in the Asian community, people have problem with it just because, as we're talking about, they feel safety in groups, right? And then so the relationship between people in groups is a lot more prioritized than the relationship you have with yourself. Because if you prioritize that, that just means you're selfish. And selfish in the Asian culture is not a good thing at all. So, however, if you want to have lasting happiness, you like that's honestly the only answer you can have for that quest. Because if you were looking for answers, outside of yourself, even in social relationship, even in relationship with your parents or just another human being, you're dependent on their answers to your question, and it's just not possible. It's not logical because the person would obviously have their own belief system, which is not necessarily the same as you. They will also have, different, maybe they're in different life stages. They can't understand you. There's so many things can happen to that person. And maybe they will have, some of them pass away. The only source of truth you can have is always your own conscience, your own judgment, and your own, like almost even in the moments where you're like, what should I do? The first thing to check is yourself, right? It's not just internet, ChatGPT, whatever. Like check with yourself first, have that intuition developed. Then you can go to the world and look for the stuff that you need for you to fulfill that.
In my experience, you don't even need to look for it that much anymore because the more true you are about yourself in the world, the easier it becomes for people who like the real you to find you.
Yeah.
So just
So you attract.
being who you are, exactly, just being who you are and truly living from that place
Yeah.
and manifesting the things in your life that are a result of who you are,
Right.
then makes it very easy to connect with people who are similar, who have the same values, who like what you do. And
Right.
it's only when you're stuck in a kind of pattern that is not actually yours that you're staying in social relationships that are not really nourishing for you because you think they belong to that kind of place where you are in society. And I think that's what's
Right.
happening in a lot of Asian societies. People are part of those social networks because they have been taught it's really important, but they
Yeah.
don't really show who they are, and nobody does. So everybody's
does.
kind of like
Nobody does.
stuck.
Guess why? Guess why? Because it's very important for Asians, like, to keep that face, right? It's very important. So like that image that you project out to the world is more important than the person you are. You don't want people to know the person you are.
Exactly.
Because that's dangerous. I mean, again, I think it's a culture. There's a huge component in the culture where it's working against vulnerability, right? So anything vulnerable, anything too authentic, is like frowned upon. Not only that, but it's dangerous, and you need to keep it at bay. And you're like, this is me. This is not good. This is not good. So yeah, it's a problem.
Wonderful. Our time has come to an end. I think this was a beautiful introduction to you and your work and the Asian Rebel Club. The mission is beautiful. Good luck with it, Crystal.
Thanks for taking the time to interview me too. There will be more episodes coming in the future. Keep subscribing. If this conversation sparked something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're building a more true life, not just more impressive, we would love to hear your story. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Asian Rebel Club and join our newsletter for more ways to connect. Link in the description. Until next time.